Let's take you here now. The Congress of the People has appealed to the country's law enforcement agencies to vigorously appeal Dr Nandipha Magudumana's attempt to have charges against her dropped. COPE National Spokesperson Bloem says the country's laws cannot be undermined. Bloem says there is a perception in the country that when one has money, one can challenge the laws and one is likely to then stay out of prison. Now, yesterday, Magudumana filed an urgent application in the Free State High Court to declare her arrest in Tanzania and deportation to South Africa unlawful. Dr. Magudumana was arrested on the 7th of April 2023 alongside escaped convicted murderer and rapist Thabo Bester in Arusha. In another court matter last week, Zandile Khumalo, Kelly's sister, began testifying in the trial against 5 men accused of murdering Bafana Bafana captain Senzo Meyiwa. Khumalo detailed the moment that her mother broke the news of Meyiwa's death to them, together with a doctor at the Bloem hospital. Now, let's get analysis on these and other court stories. We're now joined via Zoom by legal expert William Booth. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. So, in fact, let's start with the former President Jacob Zuma's High Court battle with President Cyril Ramaphosa. Can you just give us just some of the highlights about this week's developments in court? Essentially, in as far as Zuma's lawyers arguing that court does not have jurisdiction to hear Ramaphosa's application to interdict Zuma's private prosecution against him.
Good afternoon. Yes, so it's been quite interesting week of debate in respect of the Ramaphosa-Zuma application. And there was a lot of debate with regard to the court not allowing Zuma's legal counsel sufficient time. Now, with regard to these kind of applications, one, the court cannot just allow lawyers to go on and on repetitively putting forward the same argument. So what happened in respect of this matter is that there's a full bench, 3 judges dealing with the application, and the judges and the lawyers for the various parties had agreed to various time constraints with regard to arguing. And there was also a directive issued by the judges to indicate that that is the time period within which argument has to be presented. And there's also heads of argument which are presented before the time. So it would seem that, Mr. Mpofu was actually given more time than was initially agreed upon between all the lawyers and obviously the judges with regard to presenting argument. And, the argument to be repeated doesn't make it a better argument. It's to cut to the essential aspects that need to be presented to the court for the court to consider before making a ruling.
I suppose we have to wait and see what happens next. Now, let's talk about the new developments in the Thabo Bester escape case. Dr Nandipha Magudumana filing an urgent application yesterday for the Free State High Court to declare her arrest in Tanzania as well as the deportation to South Africa unlawful. She also wants to be released from jail immediately. I mean, does this bid or application hold any ground, do you think?
I don't believe so. Look, obviously, it's quite an interesting aspect as to how she was arrested. But she was illegally in Tanzania. And, they would be entitled to have her deported. So that's a bit different to extradition proceedings, where, let's say, which took place with regard to the Gupta brothers, where they were lawfully entitled to be in Dubai, and South Africa had to bring a formal application for them to be extradited. But if somebody is illegally in a country, that country can have them deported. The issue as to how she was arrested and whether that arrest is lawful and whether that could affect her being released is something the court will have to look at. I don't think that, in fact, they're going to be successful in respect of this application, because I think the idea from her legal counsel is that's going to be the end of the case. So even if the court finds that the arrest in Tanzania was for some or other reason illegal because it took place in another country, the point is she was deported from Tanzania. So if she arrived in South Africa, she could quite legally have been arrested on her arrival in South Africa. And even if the court says, well, there's a problem with her arrest, that doesn't mean to say that's going to affect the whole case and mean that she's not going to eventually stand trial. The correct way, I believe, is for her to bring a bail application, and during the bail application to present argument about the whole issue of her arrest. And then if the court hearing the bail application must then determine, is that a factor which must be considered as to whether she should or should not be arrested. So this application, I believe, is going to be heard quite urgently, possibly during the course of the coming week. So it'll be interesting to see what the court says, but I don't believe that in any way is going to affect her release. She has the right to apply for bail, as is happening with the other co-accused in the matter. They're presently applying for their release.
It's very interesting that you mention her bail application, because a lot of questions have been centered around her defense's strategy, because, I mean, they were arrested on the 7th of April, and yet her bail was not, her application was delayed for several times now, which then begs the question, was this the plan all along, in terms of her legal strategy? But let's park that for now, and let's go to the Senzo Meyiwa case. It's now been adjourned to next month. I mean, this case has been riddled with delays. Just your take on the developments so far, given the last two witnesses that we've heard from. I mean, we've also heard of discrepancies between some of the witnesses. There was also high drama, before the fifth witness, Zandile Khumalo's testimony around whether or not the media should be allowed to broadcast her testimony.
Yeah, so she's now the witness that's presently testifying, and it correctly point out there has been a lot of drama with regard to the case, including the previous legal counsel, Mr. Tefu, who was arrested in court, and then there was an application to have him disbarred. He has effectively been disbarred by the Legal Practice Council who controls all the situation with all lawyers in South Africa. And then he just popped up in court the other day saying he was a watching brief. But whether he is a watching brief or not, and whether a watching brief can appear in the matter, he's not allowed to appear anyway, because he's been disbarred as a lawyer, and the Legal Practice Council is now bringing an application that he's actually in contempt of that whole issue. So the application in court, as far as the sister of Ms. Khumalo, Kelly Khumalo, is concerned, was one that her evidence not be broadcast. The judge heard legal argument from everybody, including lawyers for the media, and found that it was in the interest of justice for her evidence to be presented to court. There's been a lot of attack on the way the case has been dealt with. You will recall the police forensic expert with regard to the issue of firearms and ballistics, and how the crime scene could possibly have been tampered with. That was dealt with some months ago. So again, this is a case where it would seem, well, there was a robbery that went wrong, and then of course people were charged with actually the murder, and all kinds of questions again about Ms. Khumalo and her involvement. So it has some, and then the lawyer's situation as well, Mr. Tefu. So that it has some interest. And again, there's another delay for her testimony to present to now at some date in June. So the court has to find at the end of the day, beyond a reasonable doubt, that the accused are guilty of the offences for which they have been charged. So the court looks at the discrepancies, the forensic evidence, and any evidence, direct evidence, be it forensic or evidence of witnesses that can link the accused to the actual murder.
Legal expert William Booth, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Really do appreciate it. Of course, commenting there about just various court cases that are currently playing out in court across the country over the past few weeks at least. All right.